Hello girls. Today we shall continue with the second part of the chapter that we have dealt with in the last class, Macbeth. But before we continue with the text, let us first remind ourselves whatever we have listened to in the previous class. Okay? So let me tell you the summary of the story so far. So we have seen that Macbeth and Banquo were returning from the battlefield, and on their way, three unearthly creatures, or the witches, stood in front of them. Okay? And they told them or declared something very unusual and strange to Macbeth and Banquo. What they told them? They told one by one to Macbeth that he was to become the King of Scotland. First, he was Thane of Glamis, then he was addressed as Thane of Cawdor, and then the third witch declared him that he would be the King of Scotland. And to Banquo, they never told that he would become the king once, but they told him that his successors or his sons can be the successors to the throne of Scotland. That means they can become kings. Okay? So these were the predictions from the three witches to Macbeth and Banquo. And then, by hearing this, they started moving once again towards their castle, and a troop of soldiers came along. They addressed Macbeth as Thane of Cawdor. Hearing this, Macbeth was overexcited. He was simply overjoyed. His joy knew no bounds. And from here we see that Macbeth's ambition that was hidden somewhere in his heart roused, and he was awakened, and he was once again trying to do something impossible, because he thought, he was convinced that yes, he can also be the King of Scotland. Then they went back home, and Macbeth told his wife, the very important character of this play, Lady Macbeth. She is very ambitious, as has been characterized or picturized in this drama by Shakespeare. She was instantly very much amazed and simultaneously surprised also that yes, if he can become Thane of Cawdor from Thane of Glamis, then he can absolutely become the King of Scotland, according to the predictions of the witches. So, she was very much excited about this, and she herself tried to make some plan. What plan? The most dangerous and terrible plan that one can make to murder the king. And yes, destiny had it for them also. The king, after their victorious journey from the battle, himself came to Inverness, Macbeth's castle, along with his few attendants and assistants and ministers. Macbeth and Lady Macbeth got the chance, an opportunity to do the evil crime. But Lady Macbeth was not at all sure whether Macbeth could do it or not. So she herself took on the responsibility on her shoulders. And she herself went into the king's chamber while he was sleeping with a dagger in her hand. But somehow she could not do it, because she found Rather, she saw her own father's face on the face of the king. So she returned to her husband's chamber, where he just tried to instigate, tried to convince, tried to manipulate her husband to do the crime himself. This was the summary of the previous part. Now let us move on to the next part. In this conflicts, the mind, Lady Macbeth found that her husband had resolved to proceed no further. But she was a woman not only shaken from her evil, not exactly shaken from her evil purpose. She began to pour in at his ears words which infused a portion of her own spirit into his hand, assigning reason upon reason why he should not shrink from the resolution he had earlier undertaken, and how the action of one night would give there all the coming days and nights to come some sovereign power and royalty. She even accused him of cowardice and fickleness for reverting to his decision. She also told him how practicable it would be to lay the guilt of the deed on the drunken grooms who were sleeping in the king's chamber. So now from this paragraph you can well understand, girls, that how very cruel and dangerous this woman was, and how very much ambitious she was, much more than her husband. Her husband, Macbeth, was thinking about whether he should do this crime, he should commit this crime or not, because murdering a king was absolutely a punishable offense, and all the blame would be coming onto him. But see, the condition was not the same for Lady Macbeth, because she was already ready with the answer to his thoughts. She thought that they would never be blamed for this, because the grooms who were sleeping inside the king's chamber can be blamed for this. So Macbeth took the dagger in his hand and softly stole into the dark to the room where Duncan slept. As he advanced towards the bedchamber, he visualized another dagger hanging in the air with the handle pointed towards him, and there were drops of blood on the tip and the blade of the dagger. Macbeth tried to grasp the dagger, but it faded into the air. It was only a phantasm created from his hot and oppressed brain for the business he had in hand. From this we can understand that yes, after so much of provocations from his wife, Macbeth went to the king's chamber with a dagger in his hand to commit the crime, to murder the king. But as I have told you earlier that girls, Shakespeare has given us a lot of hallucinations in this drama. So the first hallucination we have seen in the previous part. Now the second hallucination comes over at this point of time, that Macbeth visualized another dagger hanging from the air, and it was blood stained. So this was nothing but the thought of his mind, thought of his depressed and tense mind, that it was going to do a terrible crime. Overcoming his fear, Macbeth entered Duncan's room and slew the hapless king with one stroke of the dagger. Just as he was about to leave the room, one of the grooms who was sleeping in the chamber laughed and had cried out, "Murder!" for which both of them woke up. But then one of them said, "God bless us," and the other responded, "Amen," and went off to sleep. Macbeth also tried to say Amen, but the words seemed to be stuck in his throat and he could not utter. He felt that he heard a voice and said, "Sleep no more, Macbeth murders sleep, the innocent sleep that nourishes life. Glamis has murdered sleep, and therefore Cawdor shall therefore sleep no more. Macbeth shall sleep no more." So this was a thought from his mind. Somebody told him, some voice told him that yes, Macbeth, who has done such a blunder, such a crime in his life, he would never be able to sleep. He had perhaps lost all his sleep from now onwards. Macbeth thus returned to his wife, who now had started to think that he had failed in his objective. He came in such distracted state that she reproached for his want of resoluteness and sent him to wash his hands of the blood that stained them. So now at this point of time, we see that Lady Macbeth was not at all very much convinced that Macbeth could do such a crime, such a deed. Now Macbeth has done it. He returned to his room, his chamber, and his wife still thought that she did not do it. But actually, he had done it. Meanwhile, she took the dagger to stain the cheeks of the grooms with blood in order to make us seem their guilt. Now she was washing the blood from the dagger. Day broke, and with it was the discovery of the murder, and though Macbeth and his wife showed their utmost grief and the evidence of murder was sufficiently strong against the grooms, yet the entire suspicion fell upon Macbeth. As Macbeth had thought of, it happened really, that Macbeth and Lady Macbeth were to blame because they were the hosts. They could not protect the king. Duncan's two sons fled immediately. Malcolm the elder sought for refuge in the English court, while Donalbain the younger son fled to Ireland. So both these two sons went off to different directions. With the death of the king, the throne being vacated, and the sons being unavailable, Macbeth, who was the next heir, was crowned the King of Scotland. Thus, the prediction of the Weird sisters was literally accomplished. So now we find that yes, the prophecies or the predictions of the witches came to be true, and Macbeth was crowned as the King of Scotland. Macbeth and his queen could not forget prophecy of the Weird sisters that though Macbeth would be the king, but the children of Banquo and not of Macbeth would be the kings after him. So see girls, if we do some crime, maybe we can forget it, but it will not let us forget it. It will come with a series of more crimes. And see, that will only happen in case of Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. They could not sleep anymore. The thought that they had defiled their hands with blood by committing regicide only to place the posterity of Banquo upon the throne had rankled within them. Now they came to think that Macbeth had become the king of Scotland. Now what? Can their sons become the kings? No. They now are realizing that their sons can never be the king of Scotland after Macbeth. Whose sons will be the kings? Either of the two sons of Banquo and not of Macbeth. So now this was the matter of worry for Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. So they decided to kill Banquo and his son Fleance to nullify the prediction of the Weird sisters. But now they started conspiring about murdering or killing Fleance. For this purpose, they arranged a banquet to which they invited all the chieftains along with Banquo and Fleance. Macbeth appointed some hired assassins and beset them on the way Banquo and his son were supposed to pass. The assassins pounced upon them and killed Banquo, but Fleance managed to escape. So now you can just make the things wrap up. As according to the predictions of the witches, Banquo can never be the king of Scotland, because here we now know why. Because Banquo was to be killed by one of the assassins set or arranged by Macbeth himself. But Fleance managed to escape. Now, according to the prediction, Fleance will be the next heir to the throne, means he will be the king of Scotland. Meanwhile, Macbeth and his wife played the role of perfect hosts with affable and graceful manners that conciliated everyone present in the banquet. Now see how cruel these people were, especially Lady Macbeth. She had a smile on her face for the guests at the banquet, but she was having some evil design going on in her mind. Macbeth discoursed freely with the thanes and noblemen and regretted the absence of his dearest friend Banquo. Macbeth was also, like Lady Macbeth, was just acting of how he missed Banquo. But on the other hand, he had sent some assassins to kill Banquo, and he was killed also. No sooner did he lament for his friend whom he was missing in the banquet, Macbeth saw the ghost of Banquo occupying the seat reserved from him. Now the third hallucination Shakespeare presents before us. This is the ghost of Banquo sitting on the seat it reserved for him, though he was killed. At his horrible sight, his cheeks became white fear, and he stood quite unmannered with his eyes fixed upon the ghost. His queen and all other nobles saw nothing. Nobody came to see nothing, but only the ghost was being visible to Macbeth, but perceived him gazing upon an empty chair. They took it to be a fit of distraction, and Lady Macbeth even reproached him and told him it was the same fancy with which he saw the dagger in the air when he was about to murder Duncan. But Macbeth continued to visualize the ghost of Banquo. But here we see that Macbeth was seeing something that nobody was able to see. So how could Macbeth hold it for Macbeth's ghost? He was seeing that Banquo was sitting, and he was not at all ready to understand, not at all ready to accept the fact that it was his hallucination, and gave no heed to all the noblemen could say, and addressed the ghost with distracted words. Lady Macbeth, fearing the dreadful secret would be disclosed, in great haste dismissed the guests, excusing the infirmity of Macbeth. So now here we see that Lady Macbeth was very prompt in doing whatever she was going to do. What she did, she dismissed all the guests, those who were present there in the banquet, and now she was very much giving attention to her husband. Macbeth and his wife had their sleeps affected with terrible dreams, and the blood Banquo troubled them not more than the escape of Fleance, whom they now looked upon as father to a line of kings who would keep their posterity out of the throne. With these thoughts they found no peace, and Macbeth decided to visit the heath once more in search of the three weird sisters to know his final outcome. Now see, girls, what fate showed Macbeth and Lady Macbeth. Yes, they became the king and queen of Scotland after the predictions of the three witches. But were they happy? Were they satisfied? Were they, living their life in sound sleep? No, not at all. They were not at all happy. They could not find the satisfaction of becoming king and queen, and they did not have sleep in their eyes also. This was so very frustrating for them, and now they were out of desperation, finding a way to just lead a life of peace. He found them in a cave near the heath, where they were engaged in preparing their charms, in which they conjured up infernal spirits to reveal them futurity. The horrid ingredients were toads, bats and serpents, the eye of a newt, the tongue of a dog, the leg of a lizard, the wing of a night owl, the scale of a dragon, the tooth of a wolf, the mummy of a witch, the root of hemlock, the gall of a goat, the liver of a Jew, and the finger of a dead child. Now see how very really unearthly these creatures were. They were witches, and they were not of this earth. So they were doing something very abnormal, very unnatural. All these things, they were doing some sort of thing with all these odd things, uncanny things, ominous things. All those were set on to boil in huge cauldron, which was cooled with baboon's blood. To these they poured in the blood of a sow that had eaten her young, and they threw into the flame the grease that had sweetened from a murderer's goblet. By these charms they bound the infernal spirits to answer their questions. Now see, girls, these creatures were making something in the huge cauldron with some ominous elements inside it, and likewise these were unearthly creatures, very ominous creatures, and some more predictions were coming in the way of Macbeth. which would puzzle him, which would confuse him, because they did have double meanings. Macbeth demanded to know from them whether he would have his doubts resolved by them or by their masters, the spirits. He was not daunted by the ceremonies that he saw and boldly said, "What are they? Let me see them." So they called the spirits. There were 3 of them. The first one looked like an armed head, called Macbeth by name and told him, "Beware of the Thane of Fife." Macbeth thanked him for the caution. He was envious of Macduff, the Thane of Fife. Now, the entry of another character, a very important character, Macduff, the Thane of Fife, and he was being alarmed against Macduff. So now, let it be up to this, girls. We will finish this drama in the 3rd part and the next class of English.